I hope you can all hear me properly, and I hope you can see my screen as well. So our topic today is the topic of LGBT. Now, this topic is a very, very important topic for us to understand because these days there is so much debate and discussion around this topic, and it's getting more and more common everywhere, even in our cultures. So some of us might struggle with it even on a personal level, or we might have friends or family who are struggling with this topic. So it's a good idea to have a basic understanding of what exactly LGBT is and what Islam says about it and how we should act. So the first question is, what exactly is LGBT? What does it stand for? If we break it down, each letter stands for a word. So we have L, which stands for lesbian, G, which stands for gay, B stands for bisexual, and T for transgender. So what do these terms mean? I'll define them briefly. Lesbian basically means women or girls who are attracted to other women or girls. Gay is the same for men, so men who are attracted to other men. And then we have bisexual, which basically means anyone who is attracted to members of both genders, so both males and females. And then finally, we have transgender, which means people who feel that their gender is different to what other people think, or that from inside they feel that they are a member of the opposite gender, not the gender that they were born with. And there can always be more letters and more categories as well. It can go LGBTQIA, etc., like plus, plus, plus. So as people come up with more and more labels and more terminologies, they kind of keep adding to this term, but it's like an umbrella term for anyone who doesn't consider themselves to be, let's say, a typical person in their sexual orientation or their gender identity. So basically LGBT, mainly it covers two categories, two aspects. One is sexual orientation, one is gender identity. We will look at them both separately. So first of all, sexual orientation. Sexual orientation basically means who a person is attracted to. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the vast majority of humans as naturally being attracted to members of the opposite sex, right? Women are attracted to men, men are attracted to women. This is called opposite sex attraction, or usually the term that's used is heterosexual. Or some in slang term, you can say it's called being straight. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put this attraction in us so that we are drawn to each other, so that we are happy to get married to each other, so that we are happy to have sexual intercourse, which leads to having children, and it leads to humanity increasing in number, and humanity as a species basically surviving. However, there is a small group of people who are attracted not to members of the opposite sex, but to members of the same sex. So in today's terms, this is called being a homosexual or being gay, let's say. And then we, of course, have some people, like we said, who are attracted to both. There are some who are called asexual, which means they have no sexual attraction at all. They're not attracted to anyone. Pansexual, demisexual, etc., etc., etc. There are many categories, but the main ones that we talk about are heterosexual, which is the majority of humanity, and then some are homosexual, or there are people with same-sex attractions. So first of all, the question that comes to our mind is, how is this possible? What is the cause? Why does it happen? And honestly speaking, we don't have a final answer for that. You know, there is a lot of theories. A lot of people have different beliefs about it. You will hear a lot of people say that, you know, it's genetic, people are just born that way, but we don't have enough evidence to support or to reject that. There is some level of genes involved, but not completely. And there was a major study done a couple of years ago, and the authors basically scanned the entire genome of over 500,000 people. And they linked it with sexuality, and they found overall that there was no major gene that was causing homosexuality. They did find some variants, some specific variants, but it barely explained 1-2% of homosexuality behavior. So basically we can't really say that it's definitely genetics. So how about the environment? There is definitely the role of the environment, but again, studies have not found one particular cause or one particular factor. So some studies show that people who act differently to, the stereotypical gender behavior in their childhood, they might later on go on to become homosexual or have these attractions. But basically, we're not sure why it happens. And it's probably a very complex interaction between nature, between genes, and then the environment, social factors, cognitive factors, all of these combine to cause in some people attractions towards members of their own sex. So understanding now that this is basically what we know about why it happens, another question that comes to mind is, why is it happening more now? Even 30, 40 years ago, this was a lot less common. You didn't hear about it. You didn't talk about it. But especially in the last 10 to 20 years or so, it's gotten so much exposure, and we're hearing more and more people who are coming out of the closet, let's say, or they are coming out and saying that they are basically gay or that they are homosexual. They have these. So why has it increased? Even in our cultures, we're hearing more and more. So one possibility is that because it's becoming more accepted and people are more tolerant towards it, that's why more people are actually showing this behavior. Before, they might have been hiding it, but now they're doing it more openly. Another explanation is because that it's being legalized and it's being normalized. So it encourages more people to actually explore their sexuality, and it might lead to some more people actually coming to the conclusion that they are gay, because beforehand, most people just assumed that they will marry someone of the opposite sex. But now that it's becoming a question, more and more people are thinking about it and feeling that, no, they want to go the other way. And then, of course, there is another possible explanation. One of it is that there is so much exposure to, sexualized images, especially of sexualized female images everywhere in advertisements, billboards, movies. So there's so much exposure from such a young age, it can possibly lead to changing your natural desires into something different. But again, these are all potential explanations. As time goes on, we will perhaps begin to see more and more patterns and trends. And then why has this been more common? And definitely it's been the West that's basically encouraged this whole movement, and basically who is leading the world to become more and more accepting and more celebrating of these attitudes. So what do they think? Why do they think it? First of all, right now, they think that it's something that's totally fine, acceptable, even encouraged. This has only happened in the last 100 years, by the way. So before that, they also thought of it as something very horrible, very immoral, and it was actually punishable by death in most countries. But ever since their society is becoming more secular, more liberal, and less religious, then they began to question all their values. Whatever morals that they had, they began to say, well, why is this bad? And so they felt that a person should be allowed to do anything with anyone, as long as, they're not hitting someone or harming someone. So, and of course that the other person should also be happy to do it. So as long as it's consensual and as long as no one is getting hurt, then they should basically be able to do anything they want. So from that frame of mind, for them, basically it makes sense to remove any restrictions, any boundaries, and say, well, it's everyone's business and you can do whatever you want. It's your life. Now, that is not how we think about it, of course, because those values are not our values. We don't think that personal freedom is the biggest goal of a society. We know that there's not just physical harm to think about. There can also be spiritual harm, social harm, societal harm. We surrender ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not just in our personal lives, but also in our public lives. And we understand that Allah knows best, and He knows what's best for our dunya and for our akhirah. And our values come from the Quran and the Sharia, not just the trend of the society at the time, not just from our common sense or our intellect, but from the sources that Allah has given us. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that something is good and permissible, then we allow it. And if Allah tells us that something is bad and immoral, then what do? We forbid it. So the Islamic ruling of homosexuality, first of all, we have to understand that Islam doesn't view homosexuality as being a part of someone's identity, right? It's not a part of who a person is. So it's only something that someone might be attracted to. So Islam says that the act of intercourse between two people of the same genders is forbidden. And any sexual activity outside of a marriage between a man and a woman is forbidden, right? This is the main ruling of Islam, that only a man and his wife can have this sexual activity between them. Anything outside of that is forbidden, and specifically that same-sex relationships are also definitely forbidden. And this is shown to us in the story of Prophet Lut alayhi salam. And the Prophet Lut, as I'm sure we all know, he was sent to a town where the people were generally prone to having same-sex intercourse between each other. And it's mentioned, the story is mentioned like 9 times in the Quran, and that tells us how important it is to understand and the lessons that it makes clearer for us. So this is not a controversial or a debated topic in Islam. It's actually very clear, and all the scholars have been in full agreement about it, that homosexuality is definitely haram, and there are actually some hadiths as well who prescribe a punishment for it as well, that the government would do. So let's look at a couple of verses as well. So one of them, it says, "And remember Lut when he said to his people, do you commit the worst sin that none preceding you has committed in the world? You practice your lusts on men instead of women? Nay, but you are a people transgressing beyond bounds." So here we can clearly see that practicing your lust on men instead of women, this is something that is a big transgression. And then again, we have another verse that makes it also very clear. "And remember Lut when he said to his people, do you commit open vulgarity while you see? Do you practice your lusts on men instead of women? Nay, but you are a people who behave senselessly." There was no other answer given by his people except that they said, "Drive out the family of Lut from your city. Verily, these are men who want to be clean and pure." So we can see that it's the opposite of being clean and pure, and that it's definitely completely forbidden. And the Prophet called it to behave senselessly, to commit open vulgarity. So this is something that Islam definitely and completely rejects. But we do have to make one thing very clear, is that having same-sex attractions is not forbidden, but acting on it is definitely forbidden. Because Islam doesn't try to police what crosses our minds or our hearts. And you know what most people experience is not really a choice. They don't really one day decide, okay, from today onwards, I'm going to be attracted to, let's say, a girl says, I'm going to be attracted to other women and I will only have relationships with them. That usually doesn't happen. Mostly, it's not really under our control. So Islam doesn't forbid us or punish us for things that are not in our control, and it doesn't hold us accountable. But our decisions, our words, our actions, these are under our control, and Islam expects us to control our desires and only act on them if it's possible to act on them in a halal way. So if a person is attracted to another person of the same gender, then that's not their fault. But if they start a sexual or a romantic relationship with them, if they try to have an affair, then that is something that's definitely forbidden. So a lot of us have the question, why? Why is it forbidden? Why does Islam forbid it? A lot of people say, why would Allah even care if 2 men are having a relationship or 2 women are having a relationship? Why is it bad? So again, the answer to that is that we cannot say for sure. Quran and Hadith only say that, this is a fahisha, this is an act of vulgarity, it's immoral behavior. And we can, kind of deduce the reasons why. For example, a lot of Islamic scholars say that it's not allowed because it's not the way of the fitrah. It's not the natural way of things. The fitrah that Allah has created for humans is for a man and his wife to have a sexual union between them. So that's the only context in which sexual pleasure is allowed. If a man was attracted to another woman who is not his wife, he would also not be allowed to act on that attraction. Why? Because it's not halal, it's forbidden. So that is one possible reason for why it's forbidden. Then it's also not at all helpful for having children. And that the main purpose of a sexual union, the main reason that Allah has put this desire in us is so that we enjoy having children. So two people of the same gender, of course, they can not create a life between themselves. So that might also be a reason. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might not consider it spiritually healthy or uplifting, because a union between a husband and his wife that's based on taqwa, that is, it's half your marriage, right? Half your deen, right? We say marriage is half our deen. And it's something that's really amazing, really sublime. And then this type of relationship does not fall in that category. And also because it really unbalances the family structure. So Islam proposes the basic family structure of man, woman, and children. And Islam gives us a lot of importance that the family unit should be really stable and really secure. So because this type of relationship upsets that balance, so this also might be a reason. But all of these reasons are what we are extrapolating and what we are deducing based on Sharia and their principles. Overall, our answer is just that we forbid it because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden it. This is the main reason why we consider it to be wrong. Now, some people, they argue that, what two people do in their own lives is their own business, and, you shouldn't poke your nose in it, so it doesn't have any effect on other people, so, let them do what they want. But the easiest answer, actually, is to look at what happened during this pandemic, right, with the COVID pandemic, with the masks. So one person can make a personal choice about whether they want to wear a mask or not. And if they decide that they're not going to wear one, and then they go out and they had COVID, their personal choice, which was a private choice about what they're wearing, it's their life, etc., but it could cause harm to other people in society. They might be the cause of 50 other people contracting the COVID disease. Some people might die. Why? Because this one person thought that their personal choice is more important than the safety and security of society. So similarly, in this context, if a person is behind closed doors, if two people are behind closed doors inside their house, in a room, in secret, doing something, then honestly, we don't care about it, right? We don't try to investigate what they're doing inside their house. We don't try to violate their privacy or anything. But if people are openly conducting these relationships in public, if they're trying to make it more common and acceptable, if they're promoting and celebrating it, then it will have an impact on the rest of society. And it does make a difference to us. And so we have a duty to disapprove of it and try to stop it. So we hear a lot about LGBT rights. And then what should we think about that? So first of all, Islam protects the life and honor and wealth of all people. It doesn't matter whether they're sinners, they're not sinners, whether they are kuffar, whether they are Muslims. In all cases, as fellow citizens, we are not allowed to infringe upon the rights of other people. Now, Islam does have a punishment of the act of homosexuality. It's done in certain contexts, and it can even go up to the death, but it can only be done by the government and by the justice system. No one else is allowed to do that. So even if our government, for example, is allowing it, or they're not fulfilling their duties or responsibilities in this case, we as citizens of a state, we are definitely not allowed. We are forbidden from doing things like forming a mob or beating someone to death because there's a rumor that they're gay. So you can't kill them or beat them up so badly. Like all of these things that in our culture can be very common. This is actually completely forbidden by Islam. This is not the way that you deal with this issue. So no one will ask you to condone their lifestyle, but at the same time, you are not allowed to actually, gather up a bunch of people and then go beat someone up. Later, it might even be found out that they're innocent. This happens so many times, but what's done is done. So this type of vigilante justice, it's not allowed at all. However, we don't support things like, their right to marry other people of the same gender, or the right to adopt children, etc. We definitely don't support those rights, but we do support that they have a right to live in society without getting beat up by other people. So that being said, what do we do if we come across someone like that, especially who is a Muslim? Now, the first thing we should do is to make sure that we don't label them immediately as homosexuals or gay or lesbian, because once you put that identity on a person, then that person begins to internalize it as well. Then they really begin to feel, okay, I am this. Instead, we should say they are people with same-sex attractions. So it's not who they are. It's just a part of them. It's something that they experience, something that they feel, but it doesn't mean that we give them this label, because this label can be very damaging and words are very powerful. So we can call them people or like Muslims with same-sex attractions. So it could be someone in our community, it could be friends, relatives, it could be us. Muslims, they can experience same-sex attractions just like anyone else. So we have to understand that here it's the sin that is the issue. Not the sinner, not the actual person. So we would condemn the sinner, the sin, not the sinner. So first thing to do is to check which category they fall into. Are they only experiencing attractions and desires and thoughts? Or are they actually acting on them and dating same-sex people? So for those who are just experiencing these attractions, but they don't want to disobey Allah, they don't want to actually act on them, these people, they deserve our full love and support. We have to help them and support them, and we definitely should not exclude them. They need our support and our empathy. Their struggle is really, really difficult, but with the help of Allah and with a strong support network, inshallah, they can succeed and they will have a very, very high reward for having so much trouble and having to suppress their desires. And if they want counseling or help, then they should be given every possible resource. And if a friend or a relative or someone tells you in confidence that this is something that they're struggling with, then you should not avoid them, and you should also not spread out this information to everyone else. That you should keep their secret, never discuss it with other people unless they give you permission. And if they need some support or empathy, then you provide that. Now, there could be Muslims who are falling into sin, right? Muslims who are involved in this lifestyle, who want to have a relationship with other people of the same sex. So they need to not be completely excluded from us. We have to first draw a line. So we are definitely sure that, this is not acceptable. It's not permissible. Islamic communities are not accepting it. They should be discouraged. They should be disapproved of. First, we have to discourage them gently, and then we do it firmly. They should be encouraged to seek counseling, to talk to Islamic scholars, but we don't automatically close the door in their faces and say, I will never see you again. Don't let them into your mosque or anything like that. We have to keep the doors of communication, the doors of repentance open, and we have to give them empathy, but not support, because they're doing something wrong. And then we have a third category. And these are Muslims who openly adopt these relationships they're out and proud, they promote it, they celebrate it. They want to have pride marches. They want to say that, you know, Islamic views about this are not important or they are irrelevant. Some might even say actually Islamic rulings have actually been misinterpreted and the Quran was not really saying that, etc., etc. So these Muslims are definitely crossing the line and they're going very close to kufr. So in this case, first, Islamic scholars should have some dialogue and debate with them to convince that, you know, it's wrong. And if it doesn't work, then they should be excluded from the community. They can be boycotted, they can be rejected by the circles, the government of the country, if it's an Islamic country, they might decide to prosecute or punish them. But we must remember that even this group, abusing and assaulting them or killing them by other citizens, it's still wrong and it's not okay. So I have a couple of questions as well about this. So one person has asked, how do we know if a person is a gay or lesbian? And the answer is that you don't know. Like I said, it's just a desire inside your heart and you don't need to know. You don't need to investigate someone to find out what sexual orientation they have, who they're attracted to. If you have proof or someone tells you or they tell you that, you know, they are involved with this person, or they tell you that they have these attractions, or they express these views, or you see them, that's the only way that you will know. It's not, you know, written on someone's face that they are having these attractions. And then we have another question. Someone asked, should a person get married even though they have some same-sex attractions, or do they have to live unmarried by oppressing their feelings? Well, in this case, it's their choice, I would say. You should see if you are able to get married, then it's better to get married to a person of the opposite gender. But in that case, you have to at least be willing to engage in sexual intimacy, right? Because in a marriage, both the husband and the wife have a right to expect regular sexual intimacy with each other. So if you are willing to do that, even though you're not really attracted to that person, then yes, you can get married. And if you're completely not willing to do that, then you can maybe discuss beforehand, you know, is it okay if we don't have this? Or maybe you can find someone of the opposite gender who is also having same-sex attractions, or, you know, who doesn't have any sexual desire at all. So they will not then expect this from you. So you have this option. And if you feel completely disgusted by the thought of having sex with someone of the opposite gender, then you can remain unmarried as well. It's permissible. So now we will go to the other category that we discussed in the beginning, which is gender identity. So gender identity basically means that the gender that you belong, it basically refers to the gender that you belong to. So most people are what the West calls cisgender. So cisgender basically means that you belong to your biological gender. So if you're born female or male, you feel female or male, whatever. And then transgender is someone who believes that they're of the opposite gender. So a boy believes that, you know, he's actually a girl, or vice versa. And then we also have gender fluid people who say that, you know, some days they feel male, some days they feel female, or both. And then we have some people who say that they're gender neutral. So they don't feel particularly female, they don't feel particularly male. It's kind of, you know, they feel kind of in the middle. So this is what the T in LGBT stands for, right? We had the LGB, and then the T is the transgender. And it basically kind of covers all of these usually. So trans people are people who report that they feel uncomfortable and upset when, So they feel uncomfortable and upset when they think of themselves as their biological gender. They prefer to feel that they're of the opposite gender. Now, they're not physically different from normal people. They just feel that they have a wrong body. So someone, for example, a young boy or an even older man, they might feel that they are not actually male, but female, that they have the wrong body, basically. They might imitate the behavior of other females. They might walk or talk like them. They often report that they feel disgusted at the sight of their own body, especially during puberty when, you know, all the changes are taking place. Some even try to harm themselves or, you know, cut off their body parts so that they look less male or less female. And being trans is linked with higher distress rates, with depression, anxiety, even suicide. And some trans people, they want to have medical treatments like hormone therapy or even surgery, sex reassignment surgery, so that they can look more like their chosen gender. And this is basically called transitioning. So I want to do a quick explanation here that this is not the same thing as intersex. So this is something that, especially in the Pakistani Indian community, we get confused because a lot of times we use the word transgender to mean intersex. But intersex people are actually people who are born with a physical, let's say, a physical issue. They don't have the typical male or the typical female sex organs. Some might have both male and female parts. Some might have, let's say, male organs externally, but their internal organs might be different. So for example, someone might have internal organs like ovaries and a womb, but from outside their men. So they might be female, but they might have like very high levels of male hormones. There might be some chromosomal issues. So sometimes it's obvious from birth, sometimes it becomes clearer later on. This is also what is sometimes referred to in our culture as the third gender, right? So it's people who are not completely male, not completely female, somewhere in between. And they have separate Islamic rulings. They're not really transgender. So what we are talking about later with transgender, this is not included in there. And basically the Islamic ruling overall just says that you are going to try to figure out which gender is more dominant. So if they have both male and female, but the male is stronger, then they will be mostly classified as male. If the female parts are more dominant, if they are stronger, then they will be classified as female. So if they want to have surgery to remove like the other organs, the less dominant organs, then they're allowed to do so because there is a physical medical reason for it. And sadly, our cultures treat these people very, very harshly. They exclude them, they cast them out, they don't, they're completely rejected, and they're often then exploited by gang members, etc., etc. So we need to accept and welcome them into our society because it's not their fault that they're born like this, and they've done nothing wrong. So accepting them and providing them with the role in society can actually help them stay away from immoral behavior or dangerous things. So that's just a quick explanation about the third gender or intersex. And then coming back to transgender people. So why do some people experience such a thing? There is different explanations. Some are biological, let's say hormonal imbalance, chromosomal stuff. Then there is some theory that their brains are developed a bit differently. And then there's also an effect of the environment. So if there are very strict gender roles in a society, or society is very oppressive or unfair towards one gender, especially this can be the case with women, then sometimes they want to become a part of the other gender just so they can get more privileges. And then being abused or things like that in childhood can also lead to becoming transgender later. So in the West, basically they say that, you know, gender identity is completely different from biological sex. And they say that it's totally normal that your gender might not match your biological sex. It's totally fine. So, you know, you should use the different pronouns of the transgender person, and you should treat them like who they are saying, not who they actually look like. And there are many issues with this type of gender identity. Of course, we're not going to discuss all of it, but just have to remember that just because they feel something in one way doesn't actually make it a reality. So if your feeling is opposite to reality, then your feeling is what we need to work on, not the reality. So Islam doesn't really look at gender as a social construct. It's a biological reality. And so Islam does not permit sex reassignment surgery, and Islam also does not allow men to imitate women and women to imitate men. Islam says that Allah has created us this body and it's perfect for us. It's a gift from Allah. It should be treated with respect and love and care. It should not be destroyed and should not be changed permanently as well. However, if a person has already had surgery, then I asked Dr. Yasir Ghazi, what should we do if they have already, even though it's not allowed, but they have still had surgery. So if they have had surgery and they are now completely looking and acting like a member of the opposite gender, then you will treat them according to their new gender, basically. This is his current opinion. But because there's not a lot of research on this, we have to wait and see what Islamic scholars eventually decide. So so what can we do? What steps should we take? So if someone is behaving, let's say, inappropriately, for example, a cousin is dressing like the opposite gender, then they should be advised gently that it's not good to imitate the opposite sex. At the same time, we also don't have to force people into stereotypical behavior, okay? Because that actually makes things worse. So if a young boy likes to play with dolls, or it likes to do things like cooking and baking, or if a girl prefers, let's say, sporty activities, etc., then there's no need to force them to be like stereotypical gender behavior. So if we accept them the way they are and allow them to have their preferences, there's no harm in it. And it doesn't make them think, oh, maybe there's something wrong with me. There's, I have to change, etc., etc. So we have to remember, we treat these people kindly and with compassion. So because their brain is very strongly telling them that, something is wrong, and we should imagine ourselves in their place. How would we act? What would we do? So we're not going to treat them differently. Like if they say that they're a girl, we're not actually going to treat them like a girl. But we don't insult them. We don't mock them, call them names, beat them up. This is not helpful. Instead, we try to bring them closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to Islam so that they want to follow Islamic commands. And definitely we get them some psychological help, psychological therapy, so that they can resolve their feelings, and maybe with time they can go back to their biological gender. So we need to remember that overall, our purpose in life is to worship Allah and grow closer to Him by struggling against our desires. Our purpose is not to get the most pleasure or to always be happy or to be very true to ourselves. This is not our purpose. Our purpose is that we are sent here as a test. Some tests are harder than others. Some of our attractions and feelings are not permissible. And our success in Allah's eyes will be based on how well we follow His commands. So may Allah help all of us, and especially those of us who are struggling with these issues. And may Allah grant us all Jannah and help us understand how to act in this world so that we can be successful in the hereafter. So if someone wants any further resources as well, there's a couple of good resources. So one, if someone needs to, for example, understand this topic in more detail. So one of them is a podcast by Brother Wahid Jensen. It's called Away Beyond the Rainbow. And it's a very useful resource. You can listen to it. He's a Muslim himself who struggles, with same-sex attractions. And it could be a very useful support system to have. There are also some support servers for Muslims who have these attractions, but they don't want to act on them. Then we have the booklet Islam and LGBTQ+. I believe it's been shared with you. And there are also talks by Yasir Qadhi as well on this topic available on YouTube. You can just type LGBTQ Yasir Qadhi and it will come up, and hopefully that will help you as well. So that is the end of my talk. Now you are more than welcome to share any questions. You can open your mics or you can share them in your chat as well. Someone is asking, the girls who wear hoodies but are made for girls, is that okay? It gives a boyish look, but the clothes are for girls. Yeah, that's totally fine. And someone also asked, does judging them and passing comments on them make us sinful? It's better not to pass comments on anyone, especially someone, at the most, you can express a little bit of disapproval. So you can say, they shouldn't be acting like that. This is wrong, or they shouldn't be doing that. But sitting and kind of judging a person or mocking them or insulting them, this is not okay for anyone. So does anyone else have any questions? No questions. Come on, this is a very controversial topic, and a lot of people have a lot of feelings and opinions about that. You're more than you. If you want, you can write the chat, and I think you can actually make yourself anonymous as well. I'm not sure, but you can do that if you like. It's totally fine. So someone is asking, for people who are transgender and feel disgust in their bodies, is there any treatment that works? So this is a good question. Psychological therapy is kind of, let's say 50-50. Sometimes it can work, and especially if it's caused by abuse or trauma during childhood, then therapy can be very useful, and it can sometimes resolve the feelings. Otherwise, for a lot of people, they learn to reduce the disgust, or they learn to live with it more, or feel a bit more comfortable. But for a lot of people who feel it strongly, it doesn't go away. Even with therapy, it doesn't disappear completely. Okay, I have another question. Are intersex allowed to marry? So yes, the answer is yes, they are definitely allowed to marry, but you have to wait until it can be decided one way or the other which gender category you're going to fall into. So with an Islamic scholar and a doctor, like with a collaboration, they can basically determine whether you are mostly female or mostly male, and then depending on that, you can marry a person of the opposite gender. So that's completely permissible. But before doing that, the intersex person should make sure to reveal that fact to the proposed spouse, so that the person knows what they're getting into and they have the choice. But yes, they're definitely allowed to marry. Someone asked, are people born with this, or the environment influences? So like I said earlier, it's both. For both transgender and also for sexual orientation, there are influences of biology, but there are also definitely environmental factors as well. So it's a combination, I would say, of both the things. And can two intersex marry each other? Yes, again, they can marry each other as long as one of them is mainly categorized as a male and the other is categorized as a female. They can marry each other. If people who feel like they are dysphoric wear gender neutral clothing all their life, is that fine? Gender neutral clothing, yes, as long as you're not imitating a member of the opposite sex, it's okay. You are not obliged to dress very girly or very masculine or have this very specific thing. As long as the clothing you are wearing does not make you very much look like a man, it's okay. And for a man, of course, if they cannot wear something like dresses or something, but if they're wearing dressing that is not considered, imitating the opposite gender, then they're allowed to. It's fine. Okay, Alhamdulillah. So I think it seems that everyone has understood and no more questions. If anyone has more questions that they want to talk about it privately, then they can also get in touch with me directly. And I'm willing to talk about it and to help them through. Someone asked, the people who are born with this, how do they fight with it? And the answer is to grow close and close to Allah, so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps you and guides you and protects you and everything. To find a good support system of other people who are also close to Allah, so that, and at the same time who are supportive and who are kind and compassionate, and they help you go through with it. And also to find, if you can, a therapist or a counselor who understands your point of view and who will be non-judgmental and who will not try to convince you to start doing sins, but instead they will help you to overcome your desires and to grow closer and closer to Allah and to Jannah. It's very difficult. I know it's very difficult, because sometimes it might feel that, you know, everyone else gets to have a relationship where they can enjoy the sexual pleasure, but you cannot have this relationship, and it feels like a loss and it feels unfair. But every one of us is born with some struggles, and the life is not fair. Some people are born poor and they will never be able to enjoy luxuries or to get rich or to enjoy some of the things that other people take for granted. And some people have other desires, or they want to do other things that are definitely not acceptable religiously or by society as well. And in all cases, it can be very, very difficult to convince yourself not to just let yourself do what you want. But if we have the best intentions and we ask Allah for help and we find people who will help us, then inshallah we can get through it. Question from a sister, do the transgender marry? Is it allowed? So transgender, as in the person who is acting like or feeling that they're a member of the opposite sex, like I said, they will be treated according to their biological sex. So if it's, for example, a man and he feels that he is a woman, he can marry another woman, but obviously that woman needs to know that he has these feelings or these desires, and they need to know beforehand. And they can definitely not marry someone of the same gender as them. They have to marry someone of the opposite gender. And it can be difficult, of course, but it's permissible. It's not prohibited, as long as they tell them beforehand and they try their best to not do things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala disapproves of. And of course, if you, before marrying, you have to get, if it's a woman, then you have to get the consent from your father. But with all of that, then yes, you can marry. If they find someone who supports their mindset, wouldn't it be difficult for them to go away from it? So this is a very good question, actually, but it depends. Who supports their mindset doesn't necessarily mean that someone who says, oh yeah, you are a woman. But it means someone who understands that my husband has these issues and sometimes he's feeling a certain way or he might act a bit strange, but that woman helps them grow closer to Allah and to go away from these things. Yeah, if they are actually encouraging you to act that way, then yes, definitely it will be even more difficult for you to stop acting in a way that imitates members of the opposite gender. It's definitely a difficult and very complicated situation, and every situation also has to be evaluated on their own merits. So you cannot always have a general answer for it. So in that particular situation, what exactly is that person feeling and behaving, and what does the other person think? All of that, it depends on everything. Okay, no more questions, I believe. It was lovely to have this discussion, and I hope it helped all of you to understand this topic more. May Allah help all of us and guide all of us towards the truth and towards Jannah. السلام عليكم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين جزاكم الله خير